In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. I grew up in a construction family. My dad was a masonry contractor. He built things with bricks and blocks and stone, good solid stuff. And when I was a little tyke, I always enjoyed going out on the job with him. It was just fascinating for me to watch this whole process of taking a bare piece of land. Oftentimes it's just a lot of junk and weeds and trees and things like that growing on it. And watch over the course of the next several weeks as it would be transformed and end up being an office building, a store, or maybe a bank. It was amazing. And of course, I always wanted to participate, even though I got in the way more than I helped out. But my dad was very understanding. And he would help me with the bricks and the blocks, and he'd help get them in place. I could barely even lift the things by myself, but he'd help me get them in place. Of course, he'd make sure it was all done right. And that meant a lot to me. I could go back sometimes years later, and I could tell you which bricks or blocks I had put in. I did that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. Of course, when I got a little older, it wasn't quite so much fun anymore because my dad expected me to really go to work. And oftentimes that was either an Easter break or summer break when it was like, 105, 110, lifting up these 94-pound bags of cement, put them in the mixer, mixing up the mud, as we used to call it, setting up scaffolding, tearing down scaffolding, tearing around all the bricks and blocks. I wasn't a skilled laborer, I was the tender, That was an easy thing to teach. But I learned a lot from that. That was a great experience, and I learned a great deal from that experience. And one of the things that I learned was the importance of laying down a good foundation. Doesn't matter if you're building a garden wall, a house, or a skyscraper. You've got to have a good foundation. If you don't have a good foundation, pretty much nothing else matters. And we've been talking about foundations here over the last several weeks. In fact, a good deal of what we've been trying to accomplish has been to lay down a foundation for what is to come. See, we have promised you, we have told you that we have an amazing plan that we're going to unveil very soon. A plan that can allow us to change America. A revolutionary plan that will allow us to put God back in government. That will allow us to begin to end abortion in parts of the country in a matter of months, not years or decades. That will allow us to start to tear up same-sex marriage licenses in parts of the country in a matter of months, not years or decades. A plan that will allow us to get rid of this erroneous notion of separation of church and state. A plan that will literally allow us to change the political energy in the nation, the spiritual energy in the nation, and allow us to fight and win the Second American Revolution in less time than it took to win the first, without taking over the White House, the Congress, the Supreme Court, or any constitutional amendments. A plan to put God back on the throne. Now that sounds pretty wild, pretty crazy. We can do it. And we're going to tell you about that soon. Not just yet. You see, we've been laying the foundation. This plan is so radical, so out there, and yet so valid, and really so simple, that it's going to require you to think differently than you have gotten used to thinking. And that's the problem. You see, we have to start thinking differently in order to open our minds and hearts for this new plan so it can work. And so over the last several weeks, we have been doing exactly that. We started off by telling you why there is a need for the American Christian Patriot Church. Why there is a need for what we are doing. And the basic reason is that, politicians don't want to touch religion with a 10-foot pole, and most Christian leaders and pastors don't want to touch politics with a 10-foot pole. The problem is the two have to go together. They have to go together or we will fail. You see, our founders didn't have those problems. They knew that politics and God had to be combined or they would be building a structure that was destined to fail. Well, current political and religious leaders have forgotten about that lesson. They've lost it. We need to find it again. There's a couple of main reasons why we Christians need to re-engage in politics and politics and government. And notice I say re-engage. We used to be engaged. It's only been a matter of the last few decades that we've been scared off, running down little rabbit holes and hiding like scared little bunnies. Well, we have to get over that. And we said for a couple of important reasons. One, nothing less than the future of America is at stake. If you think about everything that makes America great, everything you love about America, Everything that the historians and philosophers have talked about when talking about American exceptionalism, everything that has inspired millions of people over hundreds of years to travel thousands of miles, leaving everything behind to participate in this amazing experience and experiment. If you think of every one of those things, they all depend upon a moral society. Talking about foundation, that has to be the foundation. You see, what our founders understood, but what we have forgotten, is the fact that without a moral foundation, you cannot have those things that have made America exceptional. You can't give a great deal of individual liberty to an immoral people and have it work. You can't have a respect for rights in an immoral society and have it work. You can't have limited government in an immoral society and have it last for long. You can't achieve the levels of prosperity and security that we have in this country without the kind of moral society that we have. It is absolutely essential. But whose responsibility is it to maintain that moral society? It's ours, the Christian community, and especially our Christian leaders. And we have failed miserably. Failed miserably. It's more than pathetic. It's shameful. We need to re-engage to shore up that foundation once again. But there's another important reason why we must re-engage. We said a few weeks back that the mission statement of Jesus can perhaps be most clearly and succinctly defined in 1 John 3:8. For the Son of God manifested himself for this purpose, to destroy the works of the devil. That's why Jesus came here. So are you and your church and your pastor committed to destroying the works of the devil? You might be saying, well, we're saving souls. Good, that's an important part. You might be saying, well, we're teaching the Bible. Well, good, that's an important part. You might be saying, well, we're helping the needy. We're providing food for the hungry and shelter for the homeless and clothing for those who need it. Well, good, that's an important part. But again, if the foundation of the nation is the Christian moral system, and we are letting that erode, then the whole structure will collapse, and therefore what good will everything else that you've done be? It won't really matter that much if everything else goes south. It's like drinking from a poisoned well. You can do everything else well, but if you drink from a poisoned well, you're going to get sick, you're going to die. We have to do that. We have to commit to that. Well, why? Why is politics, why is government so important? Because that's where Satan has always done some of his most productive work. In government and in politics, which sets up the rules for the game of government. And the reason for that should be obvious. Satan brings to the game a considerable amount of his own power. But he still needs the power that's here to use that, to work that, to corrupt us. Well, where have the greatest concentrations of power always been? In government. And furthermore, when you keep in mind the immorality of so many people, and immorality, as we've said, is based on a kind of pernicious selfishness. Selfishness at the expense of others. People who are really, really selfish need lots of power so they can indulge their selfishness, right? Again, where is that power found? In government. Satan could just set up shop at the gates of the Capitol and wait for all the slime balls to come to him. And he does. And they do. We must make sure that it's not just the slime balls getting in the gates. We must make sure that righteous people get in the gates and take control. Otherwise, all will be lost. So yes, Christians, you must get re-engaged in politics and government. In fact, if you don't, you're frankly not much of a Christian. Despite that, many of you have found some self-serving excuses for taking yourself out of the game, keeping yourself out of trouble and out of danger. And your pastors have been all too willing to play that game. You have all these, frankly, lame excuses for staying away. Well, gee, politics is dirty and nasty, and I shouldn't be involved in that. Jesus wasn't political, so why should I be? Romans 13 says to submit to authority, whether I like them or not. And then you have turn the other cheek, and those who live by the sword die by the sword, which are great excuses for keeping yourself out of harm's way and sitting on the sofa and letting the game be played by someone else. Then you have judge not, you will not be judged. which is a great way to just kind of wash your hands of the whole thing. Well, I don't like what they're doing. I don't like the pro-choicers. I don't like the same-sex marriage, but I'm going to wash my hands of the whole thing. Gee, who did that? What was the consequence? And then there's all the nonsense surrounding the argument about separation of church and state. Well, we addressed every one of those issues, and we pulverized them. And we used Scripture to do it, to show you that your notions are wrong about that. We ground it into powder, and then we released it into the wind. There is no excuse. Not only do you not have an excuse for staying out, you must get involved. With that, we've laid a pretty good foundation for what we need to do in clearing the decks for action. But there's still one more thing we have to take care of. One more order of business that we must address. Remember I said that when I would go out on the job, I loved to see the whole process, and oftentimes it started with this empty field. Well, the field was really rarely completely empty. There might be trees growing on it. There might be some brushes and bushes and weeds. There might be piles of dirt. There might be some trash there, an old sofa sitting there. And we had to, first of all, clear away all the clutter, right? Before we could even lay the foundation, we had to clear away the clutter because it got in the way. Well, frankly, brothers and sisters, there's a lot of clutter up here that's going to get in the way of us taking effective action if we don't clear it away. See, we have been trained to think and act inside of boxes that were made by the box makers to keep us under control. And as long as we oblige them and think and act the way they tell us to, they win. We lose. We must clear away a lot of these erroneous notions that we have. I mean, think about it. We tend to do what we were told is the right way to do something, whether it is or not. We accept parents or teachers or pastors or government officials as authority, and so we meekly follow along like lambs to the slaughter oftentimes. Think about it. Doctors in training used to be told, yeah, these squiggly little things called leeches, that's a good way to treat your patients. We don't do that anymore. Why? Because we found out it isn't such a good way to treat your patients. But for generations that was done. Why? Because, well, my teacher told me to. And I'm going to do what I was told, whether it makes any sense or not. For thousands of years, we thought the sun went around the earth. And if we continued to think that way, we never would have made the kind of scientific and astronomical advances that we have. But somewhere along the line, somebody figured out, no, it's the other way. The earth goes around the sun, and it opened all kinds of doors. Even just a kind of minor but personal example, my mom was always very concerned about healthy eating, healthy foods, and things like that. And back in the day, back in the 50s, all this information was coming out about how bad butter was for you. Animal fat's going to clog your veins and all that stuff. And she was very sensitive to that because she lost her mother to a stroke. So we ate nothing but margarine. Margarine's supposed to be the good stuff. And that's what I was told. And that's what my mom believed because that's what she had been told. And so for decades, I continued eating margarine, no butter. Well, now they found out, oops, margarine isn't so good for you after all. Some of the solvents they use to make this stuff are really pretty bad. You're basically eating plastic. And that butter is actually better for you. So now I don't eat margarine anymore. We've been told a lot of things that are frankly dysfunctional and untruthful. But we think they're true. And as long as we continue to think in these patterns, we continue on that same pathway. Well, what if that pathway is leading you off a cliff? And that's exactly what's happening to us. So tonight we're going to talk about 4 things that we need to accept. 4 different ways of thinking about things to clear our minds of all the clutter so that we were prepared for the radical new plan that will be coming that we will start to talk about next week. Now, I'm not pretending that these are the only 4 things that would help us, but I boiled it down to these 4, because if you accept these 4, we'll be in good shape. So let's start to talk about that. Number 1, the first thing we have to accept is this. Our tactics stink. They stink to high heaven. And I'm talking about both the patriot community and the Christian community. We've been doing the same thing pretty much for decades. And I know I've been studying this for almost half a century. We've been doing the same thing for decades. And what has it gotten us? The mess that's outside those doors. And it's been getting worse. Who's responsible? We are. Because we've let it happen. We keep doing the same things over and over again. Let's take the patriot side of the house. We're Christian patriots. Let's look at the patriot side of the house. What's the big answer of the patriot community to the problems we have? What do they tell us we need to do? Well, we read dozens of books. We listen to scores of commentators. We go to hundreds of meetings. We form thousands of organizations. We organize tens of thousands of protest activities. We draw up hundreds of thousands of protest placards. We write millions of letters, send millions of emails, and make millions of phone calls. And then we dutifully vote for the person that our political parties tell us are best qualified for the office. And what has it gotten us? Again, the mess that's outside there. Oh, so what are we supposed to do? What's the great answer of all the commentators, the experts? What do they tell us, the pundits? What's their big answer? Well, you know what? We need to read more books, listen to more commentators, go to more meetings, form more organizations, organize more protest activities, make more protest signs, send more letters, send more emails, make more phone calls, and always dutifully vote for the person that our political parties have decided are best for us. Do you really think that's going to work? Of course not. But what are you going to do? That's what we're told. Well, we need to do something different. And now on the Christian side of the house, it's even worse. The Christians don't even do that much. At least the patriots are out there making some noise. They're doing something. On the Christian side of the house, it's pathetic. We don't even do that much. We do add to the equation some prayers now and then. Problem is, we're lazy prayers. We think that a few words offered up to heaven are going to do the job. God's looking for partners, not parasites. But we think all we have to do is, dear God, please solve this problem. And then, thank you very much. God's got this. So I'm going to swing by the refrigerator, get something to drink. Swing by the pantry, get some snack. Swing over to the family room, grab the remote on the way, sit down and watch some TV and eat the snacks and drink the drink. And God's got this covered. I don't have to do anything more. We're lazy prayers. So as bad as the patriot community has been, the Christian community has been even worse. Now, mind you, I'm not saying that these activities in and of themselves are not necessarily ineffective. They could work. They could be effective. It's kind of like a bullet. A bullet can be very effective, but not if you put it in a rifle with no firing pin. And that's what we're doing. We're spending a whole lot of effort, a whole lot of money, a whole lot of energy, and a whole lot of other resources in unavailing activities because they're misdirected and misguided. So point number one, we have to recognize that our tactics stink and we need to change them. Point number two, resist the urge to boo for at least a little while until they hear me out. The fact of the matter is that for many decades now, the White House, the Congress, the Supreme Court, the Republican and Democratic parties have all done an excellent job. I'm getting some strange looks here. So, what? What did you say? I'm not being facetious. I'm not kidding. They have genuinely done an excellent job. And in recent years, they've done an absolutely outstanding job. But that leads me to point number three. Thank you for not throwing anything during point number two. That leads me to point number three. For many decades now, the job of the White House, the Congress, the Supreme Court, the Republican and Democratic parties has no longer been to take care of we the people. They're serving other masters. There are people behind the scenes who are pulling the strings. There's a power elite out there. Now, I can't look through these television lenses, the lenses of these cameras, but if I could, I'm sure there's some of you rolling your eyes and getting ready to click off from what I'm saying. Say, oh, come on, not another one of these conspiratorial elite guys. Hang on again for just a couple of minutes, because I used to be like you. It wasn't that long ago that I felt pretty much the same way. Oh, come on. Makes a nice movie plot, but, really? But I study a lot. I read a lot. Other people are out there playing golf and tennis. I'm wasting my time in books and magazines and things like that. And it started to become pretty apparent that the Republicans and the Democrats are not calling the shots. They are, in fact, the puppets being manipulated by someone else. And if you doubt that, let me challenge you. Let me challenge you to be a PCSI. What's that? A political crime scene investigator. Okay? Forget for a minute who you think you like. Forget for a minute who you think would do a good job. Forget for a minute the party you used to like or always liked or think is the one that's going to do the best job for you. Forget about all those preconceived notions and follow the evidence. If you follow the evidence of what's happening in this country, politically, economically, socially, morally, in almost every regard, they all lead to an inescapable conclusion. And that conclusion is there is, in fact, somebody behind the scenes who's manipulating our society and our lives for their purposes. And that both the Republican and Democratic parties are just pawns in this game. Now, there's lots of evidence that I could bring to your attention to argue that case. I'm just going to talk about two things, though. Talk about these two things I think make the case very, very clearly. Because right now some of you are thinking, oh, this spooky, kooky, conspiratorial stuff. You got to be a spooky, kooky nut job to believe in that. Well, let's just consider this. And first let me digress for just a moment into the realm of kind of a crossover between politics and religion. There's something that started, I think now it's about 30 years ago, and it's called intelligent design theory. Now, intelligent design theory is really kind of fascinating. It's a bunch of scientists who've come to the conclusion that all the evidence indicates there has to be an intelligent designer, whether you want to call him God or whatever. Doesn't necessarily tell us what kind, but science, the creation itself, all argues for the existence of this intelligent designer. He may be merciful, he may be not. We don't know that part, they don't know that part, but from their evidence they can say, look, there's somebody who's really smart and really powerful who thought this up, designed it, engineered it, and made it happen. And they have ways of going about telling this. And what led them to this did not start in the religious community. It started in the scientific community. Starting maybe, like I said, about 30 years ago or so, our information and our tools of analysis became so powerful that they started revealing things that we never saw before. Just like the complexity inside a single cell. And they said, hey, we just thought there was this little dark glob of jello in there, and then we called that the nucleus, and around that was another not so dark glob that was around that. That's the inside of this cell, and then there's this skin around it we called the membrane, and that was it. When we started to see what was really going on in there, we realized that what is happening in a single cell is more complicated than the most sophisticated supercomputers we have yet to create. Whoa, this could not happen accidentally. There's no way this could have happened accidentally. And they found this across the board, from the very, very tiny subatomic to the very, very large galactic and beyond. And everything they looked at, they started to see, whoa, this complexity that just could not be explained any other way, other than, there's a God. Now, they had certain tools that they used to basically prove this, to use the evidence. Now, what kind of proof? They didn't have empirical evidence. Empirical is just a fancy word for eyewitness. I watched somebody. What's the freezing point of water? Well, I get a glass of water, I put a thermometer in it, and I put it in the freezer. And I look in there every now and then, 45 degrees, nope, it's still liquid. 37 degrees, nope, it's still liquid. 33 degrees, nope, still liquid. 32 degrees, it's rock solid. Freezing point of water must be 32. I saw that. It's empirical. Unfortunately, we can't empirically prove the existence of God. We don't have some super telescope that we can point at exactly the right azimuth, exactly the right direction, and peek inside God's kitchen window and see him whipping up a PB&J sandwich, right? We can't do that. But there's other types of evidence, deductive evidence. And to give you a good example of what that is, we see it all the time in crime scene investigation. Remember I said it'd be a PCSI? There's lots of people behind bars right now, and nobody saw them commit the crime. But we were rock solid in our certainty that they did it. Why? Because we have other types of deductive evidence. We have fingerprints. We have DNA. We have epithelial, skin evidence. We have gunshot residue. We have fiber evidence. We have all of these things. And they come together and say, yeah, you did it. You're going to jail. And we were certain of our conviction. Well, God was a little messy when he was making everything because he left his fingerprints everywhere. And that's what the intelligent designers look for. Now, one of the tools they use is called specified complexity. Sounds kind of weird and out there, but it's really not that difficult. Complexity just has to do with this. They say if there's something that is very, very, very complicated, complex, and if that very, very complicated thing tends to work toward a specific goal, that's where your specificity comes in. So specified complexity, something very complex, very complicated, couldn't just kind of happen on its own, and it works for a specific goal, that's probably a very good indication that some intelligent designer made it. Good example, the eye. There's so much stuff that has to happen for the eye to work, and not just the eyeball itself. I mean, think about it. Where else do you find something clear? I mean, the nails aren't really clear. You can just kind of see light through them, but they aren't clear. The only place you really see something that clear in the body is right where it has to be. And then the muscle, the iris that controls how much light is coming in, the retina in the back that receives that information, the ocular fluid that's in between there that's also clear, and then the optic nerve that connects and takes that information to the brain and the part of the brain. It's just way too complicated. And it works for a specific purpose. And that means somebody designed it. And that's just the eye. We've got stuff, got a whole universe full of this stuff. Okay, specified complexity. Let's take that same principle and apply it politically, as we're being those PCSIs. What do we know about nature and people in general? One of the things we know is things tend to fall apart, right? I'm getting older, I can see I'm falling apart, right? Things tend to fall apart. A piece of fruit tends to rot. Houses get old enough, they tend to fall apart. Walls fall over, things like that. Fabric rots, comes apart. That's just a natural process. Things disintegrate. They degenerate. They become disorganized. So when we see the opposite happening, that's like waving a red flag saying, hey, something's going on here. I wonder if somebody is doing something. Okay? What do we know about the political processes and the people who run it, like the politicians and the bureaucrats? Not all of them, but a great many of them, are corrupt and or inept. These people are so corrupt and or inept that they could not find their shoelaces with a map and a personal guide. And yet, despite that, there have been two trends that have been going on for over 100 years now that are incredibly complex, extremely difficult to pull off, very well organized, and patiently executed. What are those two trends? One of them that we have seen is the accumulation of more and more power into fewer and fewer places. That doesn't happen naturally. Somebody's got to force that. Things tend to fall apart. I mean, you have a few people in a business together and they tend to start arguing and the thing comes unraveled. That's the tendency, not for things to come together. You have people on a sports team and they start to argue. Well, should he bunt or should he swing away? You know, things kind of tend to come unraveled. And yet what we have seen is the concentration of more and more power into fewer and fewer places. And this is not only against the natural trend, it is against a constitutional trend, an organizational trend. You see, our founders understood that humans, they're stinkers. They're stinkers. They've got this greedy, selfish heart. And they will always tend to indulge that greedy, selfish heart. Even Christians have those inclinations, and we fail from time to time, and we pursue those selfish, greedy inclinations. The founders understood that, and they said, you know what? We're never really going to change human nature sufficiently to be able to trust them to do the right thing. So we're going to have to build a structure that will try to minimize the damage that they can do. And so what do? They wrote the Constitution in such a way as to decentralize the power, spread it out among millions of people, so that everybody has just a little bit of power, And with just a little bit of power, all you can do is a little bit of damage. And we can withstand that. We can survive that. But they wanted to make sure that no one or no small group of people got a great deal of power, because then they can do a great deal of damage, and we cannot withstand that. So this accumulation of power not only goes against natural tendencies, not only goes against organizational tendencies, it goes against the legal tendencies of the primary law of our land, which is the Constitution of the United States. Now, you think that's happening accidentally? You might be spooky and kooky if you do. And let's look at something else. And this is a related trend. This is kind of the flip side of the same coin. What we have seen for well over 100 years now is that more and more of the wealth that is created in the private sector is being transferred over to the public sector. It's created in the private sector. It's transferred to the public sector where it is controlled and used. Now, let me give you a quick little class here on some basic economics, because if you don't understand this, you're not going to get this point. Wealth is not pieces of paper with numbers and pictures of dignitaries on it. And it's not shiny discs of pretty metal. That's money. Money is not wealth. People get that confused. Money is a way of measuring wealth, like a yardstick. How much wealth do we have over here? How much wealth do we have over here? And it's a way of exchanging wealth, like a check. You write a check to somebody, say, I'm going to exchange $100 from my account and send it over to your account. That's what money does. It is not wealth. Well, what is wealth? Wealth is goods and services. Goods are things, like an apple, a pair of shoes, a car, a house. Services are labor and advice. Labor, like the work that somebody has to go through to grow the apples and then provide them to you. Or to make the shoes, make the house. Like my dad used to build buildings. That labor. Or it can be advice. Services can also be advice. Like the doctor who says, you eat more of these apples, you won't be seeing me as often. An apple a day keeps the doctor away? Okay. That kind of thing, those are all services. That's real wealth. And who creates them? We do. We in the private sector create almost all the wealth in the world. But it's being transferred to the public sector. So those same people who are accumulating the power are now accumulating the wealth, which is the most versatile form of power, because wealth can be converted into any other kind of power. Okay? Money is just a way of measuring how much wealth you have and of exchanging it. And if you still think that money can be wealth, and you might be thinking that, because I can take this piece of paper with a picture of Hamilton on it, the number 10 on it, and I can go to a store and hand it to them, and they'll give me, 3 pairs of socks. And I might be thinking, well, yeah, this money is worth 3 pairs of socks. No, it's not. What that money represents is worth 3 pairs of socks. Now, to make this a little clearer, imagine you knew that for the next 12 months you had to live on a desert island that had absolutely nothing on it but sand, not even a tree. And you're surrounded by the ocean. Salt water. You can't drink salt water for very long without it killing you. Okay? You're going to have to spend 12 months there. I'll make you an offer. Which would you rather pick? I'll give you a pallet with $100 billion on it, or I'll give you a little storage, or a big storage container with the 13 months worth of food and water and medicine and shelter and clothing and all that good stuff. Which one would you take?
The pallet.
You're going to take, not the pallet, you're going to take the warehouse. Why? The little storage container. Why? If you take the money, you're going to be dead in less than a week. Money is not wealth. It is a means of measuring wealth and exchanging wealth. So, look at these two trends now. More and more power is being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. Again, very difficult to pull off. Very hard, very sophisticated. Evidence that somebody's behind the scenes doing it. And more wealth that is created in the private sector is being transferred over to the public sector. Again, this confiscation, this plunder of the wealth that we create is very, very difficult to pull off. Very sophisticated. Now, just like it would be foolish to think that this eye came about without the work of an intelligent designer. It would be foolish to think that these other trends are happening without an intelligent designer making it so. So if you think there are not forces behind the scenes that are pulling the strings, then you're the one who's spooky and kooky. Time for point number 4. Before we do, let me recap 1, 2, and 3 because we've been talking here a little bit. Point 1, our tactics stink. And if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to keep getting the same thing. Point number 2, for decades, the White House, the Congress, the Supreme Court, the Republican and Democratic parties have all been doing an excellent job. Point number 3, the job of the White House, the Congress, the Supreme Court, the Republican and Democratic parties for months now has not been to take care of we the people. It's been to serve other masters. And those masters are taking away our power and our wealth and will use them to enslave us. Now, that leads to point number 4. And again, these are the things you must come to accept to clear your mind, to be in the mood, in the frame of mind to accept the plan that we're going to start to unveil next week. Point number 4 is this. I've been studying history a long, long time, actually a little longer than I care to admit. I thought about this a couple of months ago, and I realized that in about another 5 months or so, I will have been studying history, especially political history, for half a century. I started in the fall of 1966. I can pinpoint when that started, so I'm at about 49 years and 7 months. Well, I learned a few things, and one of the things that I saw is this. If you look at the greatest movements for change throughout history, they almost never have been reform movements. They have almost always been replacement movements. Our own American Revolution is a classic example. For decades, we worked with the British. We considered ourselves British. We considered ourselves citizens of the empire. We just wanted to be treated that way. But the people back across the pond didn't like it that way. They wanted to, guess what? Accumulate more and more power on their side of the ocean, under their control, and confiscate and transfer more and more of the wealth that we created over to their side so they can control it and keep us under wraps and in control. Gee, that sounds familiar. It's a pretty recurrent pattern in history. For decades, we worked with the British about this. We wanted to reform our relationship with them because we wanted to stay British. Finally, people began to get the idea that this wasn't going to work. And by the mid-1770s, enough of us came to the conclusion that it wasn't going to work that we decided, no, we're not going to reform the current system, we're going to replace it. And thank heavens they did, because by that very decision, by that mind-cleansing act and the willingness to try something different than the same old tactics, they opened the door for the creation of history's greatest, noblest, most powerful, most wonderful nation, the United States of America. And if they had not cleansed themselves of all that age-old clutter, it never would have happened. You see, the problem is, if all you do is reform a sick system, you just get a sick system with a Band-Aid on it. And we need better than that. We must replace the current system. Let me repeat, we must replace it, not reform it. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking. No. I love America. I love the Constitution. I don't want to lose those things. I'm sorry to have to break it to you. You already have. The America that you love, the America of the history books, is already gone. And the Constitution is dead. The nice clinical term that seems to be used now is we're living in a post-Constitution period. The Constitution is dead, let's face it. And ironically, it was murdered by the same people who chose to define it as a living document. That was a setup. That was a setup that they used to open the door so they could redefine it and kill it. Our job is no longer to preserve, protect, and defend America, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Our job is to get them back. And we're not going to do it with the same old thinking. We have to think anew. See, here's the facts. The game is rigged. The deck is stacked. We cannot win this game. We cannot. And it's designed that way. The people behind the scenes who are pulling the strings, and that's not the Republicans and that's not the Democrats, those are the puppets that are being manipulated. But the people who are doing the manipulation have designed this game so we cannot win. They just want us to think that we're having some influence. That's what this charade, which we call presidential politics, is all about. Everybody's arguing over Bernie or Hillary, or Donald, or Marco, or Ted, or whoever. Now, right now, it doesn't matter a hill of beans who we put in the Oval Office. We could take the best president ever, put him in the Oval Office, and it wouldn't make much difference at all. And the reason is because he would be confined by the sixth system. It's like getting the world's greatest race car driver on your team. We're going to put him in a race. We're going to put him in a race against some drivers who just got their training licenses. Do you think we might win? Do you think we got a good chance of winning? Not if we put him in a broken down 1993 Yugo that's up on blocks. That's what our government has become. And that Yugo is being towed by a tow truck in a certain direction. We need to be concerned about who's driving that tow truck. The game is rigged, the deck is stacked. If we continue in the conventional way, it's a lot like going to Vegas and betting against the house. No? You might win a few hands. You might win a jackpot or two. But you play long enough, you will lose everything because the game is rigged, the deck is stacked. If you want your America back, then you have to commit to replace this current evil system with another. And next week, we're going to start to tell you exactly how to do that. So stay tuned.